right, welcome to the Real Squabble. Today we're delving into one of the most profound questions humanity has ever grappled with. Do we have a soul? What does it mean for our existence, our communication with one another, and our connection with God? To help us navigate these deep waters, I'm thrilled to announce that we're joined by Dr. Joshua Ryan Farris, a former Humboldt Research Fellow at the University of Bochum, Germany, Deutschland, now on research faculty. He is author of the thought-provoking new book, The Creation of Self, A Case for the Soul. It's my new favorite book, Josh.
Oh, wow.
Really excellent. I'm ripping you completely off for my novels,
Oh, good.
in the future. So yeah, you and JP Moreland, I'll see you in court. Yeah.
Yes. Once you make those millions. Yes, of course.
Well, Josh and I were already talking about maybe collaborating on a book in the future. Sort of like the Tim LaHaye, Jerry Jenkins phenomenon. We're gonna make movies and go on book signings.
Oh yeah.
Right after you pick up Josh's new book, of course.
That's right.
Right. So in his book, Dr. Farris explores the intricate dance between our physical bodies and the soul, shedding light on what I describe as how our soul bridges the gap between ourselves and the divine, between God and other people. And today we'll be discussing a whole range of things. So I hope you'll stick with us and subscribe to our YouTube channel, including artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and everything from the nature of the soul and its role in our lives, meaning how it interacts with God and our mental health, maybe even mental health issues. We may delve into that a little bit. Also, is the soul a beacon of strength amidst those types of struggles, or do those mental health struggles raise challenging questions against the existence of the soul? Josh and I have talked about that a little bit because I'm well acquainted with some various individuals who have mental health issues. And it kind of turned me on to thinking about the soul. So Dr. Farris offers compelling insights that you don't want to miss right here on The Real Squabble. So growing up, Josh, I always heard the expression, well, bless your soul, right? Kevin's heard that out in Texas, I'm sure. Or bless your heart.
Oh, yeah.
And the heart and the soul are kind of interchangeable in today's world, right? And I always like soul food, right? And soul music.
I do too.
So
I grew up with it.
I was born.
Yeah.
I was raised with James Brown and Earth, Wind and Fire, so I know I got soul.
Ow!
It's just
Get on the hot foot, right?
I like to. Some have referred to me as the soul man. The soul man. Have you heard of that song? The classic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right. If you start dancing like John Belushi, then go ahead. Maybe we'll take an intermission and let you kind of like do that across the stage for us here. That is it. And I say that because it just seems like the belief in the soul has just really become a natural part of our culture, right? It seems like it's just a common sense thing that we're just born with. We kind of know that we have a soul, right?
I think so. I agree. I think it's still so common. It's been common historically. I mean, the soul has been a belief that has been common throughout most of history, throughout most of the world, in most of the religions, the great religions of the world. But I mean, today, I think the soul is taking on more of a metaphorical meaning as at least the ancient idea has become more eclipsed in social consciousness a bit more. So it is a bit of a fuzzy idea in the minds of many contemporaries today.
Well, just in a popular sense, I know for sure. I mean, I've been on the at deathbeds where it just seems like you could almost feel the presence of the soul leaving the body. And I've heard a lot of people say things like that. Religious people and non-religious people. So, and that's where a lot of us are. This is a brilliant book. It's accessible, at the academic level, but also the popular. I think it's an easy read. And it was there was an afterword by Dr. Stephen Meyer. So you got to know folks just how good the book is. It's worth picking up on Amazon. And where else can you get this, Josh?
You can get the book on the main website, which is just look up The Creation of Self. It'll pop up on Google immediately, which is If Publishing. But it's on all major platforms now. It should be on CBN if you buy from Christian Broadcast. What is it?
Christian Broadcasting Network?
Oh, no, not that one. CBD, right? Christian Broadcaster.
Distributors?
Yeah, I used to buy from them years ago.
One of those alphabet companies. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's on all major platforms. Yeah, you can get it anywhere.
Okay, so Josh, in my I live in a condo in Annapolis, and we've got 3 elevators. So a lot of times I've got those short elevator speeches
Yes.
that happen with people, and they a lot of times the last sentence happens while the door is closed, and I'm like, hey, see you later, right? So in that sense, and we'll get into some deeper stuff as we go, of course, but what would your elevator speech or argument be for believing in souls? Because I've heard the kids on campus around the country say, that's just so ridiculous that a soul, really? Are you Neanderthal? That we've gotten so past that. But what would be your quick elevator speech as to why souls exist? Go.
Yeah, that's good. I am referred to as an old soul often by the younger generation. Quick elevator speech. I think if there is any possibility of disembodied survival, which we know that our bodies will go into the grave, then something like a soul must be true of us. It must be kind of that essential part of us that makes us who we are, that continues on or persists into the afterlife. And I think we have good reason to believe that is the case based upon our own first-person perspective, the knowledge that we have of our own selves, and the knowledge that our own selves entail about what it is that you and I are, what it is that we are, what is it I am. At least I have direct access to my own cognitive or mental conscious states. And there's something about that is deeply, deeply unique about the person that distinguishes it from the body or from my body. There's something about else going on that entails the possibility of survival.
Okay. Ding. Okay. Okay. Hey, that's great. But you said the mere possibility.
Yeah.
Really? Does just the mere possibility entail that a soul must exist?
Yeah. So I would say the mere possibility is rooted or grounded already in a fact about the self that in some ways distinguishes, not separates, but distinguishes or makes myself independent from my body in some real sense. Myself is independent from my body. If that fact is true, it's not just a possibility that the soul is true. What is a possibility is that I would be decoupled or disembodied, as many of the great monotheistic religions claim to be true, and most people throughout the world have believed to be true throughout most of history. It would be true based upon that more fundamental underlying fact. So it's not a mere possibility. It's something. Obviously, I'm not disembodied at the moment, but the fact that there may be something about me that makes me apart from my body or independent from my body is the reason or the rationale for the fact that I could exist disembodied.
Well, okay, and I've heard that. I think I read that in your book, and I believe that the argument kind of goes that it's not even possible that your brain could exist your death, but it is possible that your soul could, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, so there's a clear sort of as philosophers call it, a clear kind of modal distinction between the possibilities of the body and the possibilities of you as a self, as an immaterial thing, or as a thing distinct from your material body. So it's grounded in some reality or actuality about what makes me, distinct from what makes my body my body. And so that's what makes it possible to exist. And for a body, everything that we do know about the body renders it, it seems, incapable of persisting beyond the grave, which we know, like just commonsensically from observation, that people die and, you know, their bodies get put down into the ground, and there's something, the body is still their body in some commonsensical sense, but it's a dead body. It's no longer living.
Right.
But to suggest that that modal possibility is what makes sense of your modal possibilities, I think is a different matter.
You got it. It's something different that could happen. So
Yeah.
this is Kevin Harris from reasonablefaith.org with Dr. William Lane Craig, and he's been very busy doing podcasts over there, joining us from Texas today.
Yes.
Okay, out there in the hot, blistering Texas. Although the whole country seems hot and blistering right now.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Kevin.
Well, Josh, it sounds like what you're saying is when you look at the law of identity, that there are things about the body that are not true of the mind or the soul, so they're not the same thing. And so there is a distinction there. I think what confuses people is because there is interaction between the soul and the brain, that they are somehow the same thing. All that shows is that there is some kind of interaction, but it doesn't show that they are the same thing. Am I right on that?
Yeah, that is correct. That is absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, go ahead.
And by the way, Dr. Craig, whenever we start talking about the soul, he just says, "Ask J.P. Moreland," or and he refers to certain people because
Joshua Ryan Farris.
And he's got his list, but he knows again that this is how difficult this subject is, and he's pretty well versed in it. It's at the same time it's funny to see him say, yeah, you need to ask JP about that.
Well, and that's something our audience needs to know. You've got doctor in front of your name. You're not Josh is not an expert on biology, or maybe he is. I don't know. It's very specialized, and that's why we like to talk to these folks, because they know what's going on in this area of the soul, especially Dr. Farris. So you kind of hit on this a minute ago, Josh. That is the consciousness. Is that how we define consciousness, as just being self-aware? Or what is consciousness anyway? Is because some people say, well, you just kind of, it's that thing that, all these, it's like the H2O, right? And all these molecules came together and water emerged, and that's what happened with our brain. It just kind of, it splurted out there.
Yeah. I want to say, I appreciate Moreland's books. Consciousness and the Existence of God was really influential on me, and so Craig is right to refer to him. Craig was quite fond of what I was doing in the creation of self. So to answer your question, I think I wanted to begin with a kind of a quote that I thought that kind of fits in with what you're gesturing at. Famous quote by Leibniz. He says this, quote, "If shrunken so I can stroll around your brain and look about, I will observe neuronal processes, not experiences." End quote. It's a great quote from Leibniz. And so the idea is that when we're trying to ascertain or isolate some kind of definitional meaning, or some kind of designation for the person, the self, obviously philosophers might distinguish between those two terms. I don't make much of a distinction between the two, but that designation seems to be related in some ways to a more fundamental conception of the self. So consciousness does really seem to be the kind of the right avenue for arriving at some kind of definition or designation of persons or souls, or persons or selves. And so consciousness, to answer your question, consciousness is something like, there's different characteristic properties often ascribed to consciousness. One of the more fundamental ones is what philosophers call phenomenal qualia, or something like that. Phenomenal qualia,
which is the root of quality, right? The quality of something, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So the raw quality.
Yeah, that's right. So the experience of what it is like, the experience of what it is like, the experience of experiencing chocolate ice cream, or the any other experience, experiencing the blue sky, and having knowledge by way of that, by way of that experience itself, that is actually derived from the fundamental experience that the one has of the world outside of them. And so quality, or phenomenal experience itself, seems to be one of the, at least descriptive characteristics or attributes of consciousness that I think helps us get at some kind of definition, designation of what it means to be a person or a self. So so I think I think that's one characteristic, and an important characteristic that in an important way, like, lends itself to what Richard Firmerton, the really excellent epistemologist, calls epistemological or phenomenological dualism. There is this kind of necessary kind of dualism that we begin with, and you might say, he calls it, there's phenomenological knowledge that gives us some kinds of knowledge, and then there's also empirical knowledge, which is derived from or inferred from phenomenal knowledge itself. So there's one kind of knowledge or set of properties from that knowledge that is given to us directly by way of our phenomenal or first person experience, that is necessary, and the other one we only know, at least as independent set of knowledge,
right,
by way of an inference or a derivation from our phenomenological knowledge.
So what you're experiencing matched up with the reality of what the world actually is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So it's the idea that there are certain truths that are known about existence, that are known from mental states, that are distinct from knowing truths about the physical world. There are two different types of knowing.
Gotcha.
And so that opens up the door then quite really quickly, like, well, then what do we do with that? How do we make sense of what it is that we're talking about? Right. So that's an epistemological issue first. And then, but that epistemological issue has certain metaphysical or certain answers that require an explanation of definition, what it is that we're talking about.
What it is, right?
Yeah.
So, so correct me if I'm wrong. Sort of the way I understand this is, because epistemology is a big word for some people, but it just basically means what it is, and you could be wrong, right? The ontology or the ontological is what actually is, right? Am I correct there? It's like you could think you know something, but you could be wrong. There could be an actual ontological thing going on. I could say there's someone outside my door and be correct, but also be wrong. But in an ontological sense, someone is really there. So that kind of leads me to a question in that area of knowing things. How do we know that we exist and we're really thinking and we're not in some kind of matrix, or in the movie Inception, or navigating some kind of complex dream world? right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what, you hear that from some people. Oh, well, this is just all an illusion.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Josh,
Yeah.
well, Josh, while you're thinking of, well, you're good. Before you answer that, I just want to point out that you guys may have noticed how popular this notion is right now. If you scroll through TikTok, there are all these lay people who think that we are in a matrix, and that there are glitches in the matrix that they are able to catch on video or whatever. And there's a lot of stuff about the Mandela effect.
I was gonna say that my son is into that.
Yeah, and some of that's pretty interesting.
And
You know?
they come at you, Josh. They come at you, and these are diehard believers, like they saw a ghost. It's like, I know that that was called Kit Kats with a dash in between, or I know that it was Fruits Loop instead of Fruit Loops, or they just are adamant that they know what they experienced. So I mean, I know we're kind of that's in a popular sense, but from a philosophical sense, how do we drill down and sort of answer those fundamental questions about our existence and how we're thinking?
Yeah. So I think one of the ways we get at this question is to well, we have to step back and try to get some sense of what it is that we actually do know, and if there is any distinction between kind of the conditions of knowledge itself compared to the possibility that in a secondary sense or in a derivative sense, our perceptions of independent reality can be wrong, or obviously our perceptions of the world about the actual facts in the world can be wrong at times. They can be they are you might say they're able to be confirmed or disconfirmed by way of maybe certain kinds of evidence or something like that. Of course, and this is obviously one of the pragmatic arguments that's been advanced in favor of kind of materialistic science. The materialistic science has actually won the day, in the sense that it is the kind of attitude or the motive that has driven the success of science throughout history. And so there's good reason to kind of stick with it and see as far as it will go, see how far it will go. But I think there's a more fundamental problem in when we think about the nature of mental states themselves. There's something about the nature of mental states as phenomenal experience, as this kind of deeply fundamental datum that we begin with as human beings. This datum of experience that at one level underlies the rest of our knowledge. It's and unless we're going to just kind of eschew or ignore or deny that is a reality. So there are some materialists who would go that far. They would be called eliminativist materialists. They would eliminate the possibility that there is some sort of experiential knowledge that is real, that is not explained by something other than physical things, physical parts, or whatever. If we're not going to go that route, then we have this fundamental problem, this knowledge problem that we begin with, that that is more sure of that is more certain than physical knowledge even of it itself. The fact that I know that I am who I am and that I have
Right.
these experiences at some fundamental level, right? The fact that I experience, there's something about that
Yeah.
is at some base level undeniable.
Right. Josh, I was going to say that, in the context with everything you're talking about with those scientists and with Leibniz being in the brain, right, doing those things you were talking about, there is a they, there is a them, there is a him that's observing and making a decision about what do you call it, the qualia, the raw qualitative experience.
Yeah.
If I'm right there, that their self, which is what your book is titled, The Creation of Self. There is that self that's observing those material things and deciding whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So who's deciding whether the self is right or wrong?
Think about it. It's the Matrix. And by the way, the reason that's so popular with people is because of the movies. I mean, it's not because all these people are having all this philosophical insight. I don't think. I think
Right.
those Keanu Reeves movies have
He's
influenced the
handsome.
culture into questioning whether we're in the Matrix. But it comes down to what I've heard, Josh, is illusionism. But if that all is an illusion, now that presupposes that there is a real by which to compare the illusion. I don't know what the illusion is unless I know what the real is, unless I have a backdrop of reality and say this is reality and this is the illusion. So you can't say that all is an illusion. Illusion means that you have is a misperception or a misinterpretation of the real, of the data.
Well, the truth is, Kevin, you're having a delusion right now, and I'm not really here. Or if I am, I'm actually a humanoid robot, which is where we've got a lot to move through, and I don't want to give away everything.
Maybe
Joshua,
that human,
and Joshua's
maybe that
great
humanoid robot is real though and conscious.
Yeah, I mean, we are kind of like that wet robot, aren't we? In a sense, and that has I think about that. I think about that in my writing. I know it gets me excited about thinking about the soul, and I wonder about all the artificial intelligence that's really consuming the world now, and whether or not artificial AI could ever achieve true consciousness or self-aware. What are the moral, implications or ethical dilemmas that we might have? And could your soul? This is a question that I have, and I think I sort of hinted at it in my novel that I'm going to release this fall. But I hinted at it. I'm thinking about doing a third book related to it, and that is, couldn't your soul inhabit a humanoid form? And
I think that's a good question.
And control the cybernetic brain. Why not? If this is just material, why couldn't that happen?
Yeah. That's a good question. That's a live question. I think that's really good in terms of also asking about the implications of this. I mean, Neil Postman in his book Technopoly says that we are literally in a technopoly now. It's actually a really deep problem for us as classical thinkers, as Christian thinkers. We don't realize how much we've already been kind of dictated to by technology and AI, even more so, and in an ongoing sense. Like it's affected us in deep ways, as the internet has, but AI is going to affect us in other ways. That takes us into a different realm of discussion. But as I've been thinking about it, I've become more pessimistic about AI over the last year.
Well, I've kind of like pushed I find it kind of absurd that you could actually upload consciousness because that's our soul, but I haven't dismissed whether or not the soul could inhabit something else, like when it returns to a body.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's right. Yeah, what would it mean to upload consciousness? I mean, if consciousness were something that were somehow embedded in the physical in a way that it was either identical to the physical or physical parts, or that it
Yeah.
supervened on it in some way. What would it mean to actually contain the consciousness? If there were some necessary connection between consciousness and the neural bits, then maybe if we can control the right neural bits, right, if we have enough exhaustive empirical knowledge, then we can actually maybe we could no, I don't even think in that case we could upload it, because it would require
Yeah.
the right sort of physical neural bits to do so.
Well, I'm sort of thinking along the lines of, it wouldn't be the humanoid that is, maintaining the soul. It'd be the soul, just as I think you probably believe, is that the soul would just go. The soul would be the driver.
Yeah.
And it really kind of wouldn't matter at what technological level we were at. The question would be, if a soul is real, and this would lead us into another question, and you can finish up the thought on this first if you like, but people automatically dismiss this idea of a soul being anti-scientific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. What would it be for a soul? Yeah, that's a more complicated question. On my view, could a soul inhabit a different body? So there's these old kind of intuitions and thought experiments about body swapping and the like. And at least in principle, on my view, I'd have to say that it's at least conceivably possible. I'd have to say that. Now, a robot body, that would raise a further question about the functional kind of suitability of machine bodies, and whether or not a soul could inhabit that. I don't know how that would actually be. It seems inconceivable in one way, but maybe God could kind of just put the soul in the machine body or something like that, and
Well,
then
he's going to give us new bodies in the end.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
I don't know that Scripture actually speaks about whether or not we could sustain ourselves for a while.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, I'd like to beat the record, beyond Methuselah.
Yeah. Right. Why not? Why?
Maybe there's a little silliness in that, but not. It's because I think anything that turns us on to just really thinking about it in a deeper way is interesting, and it'll certainly get people excited about reading your new book.
Yeah.
You bring up some words that I had to keep it. Most of it's very, very easy reading, but you bring up a couple words that I had to go to the dictionary after, like pluripotent powers. I thought that sounded really like a great superhero ability for someone to have. Could you explain what that is? Because it seems complicated, but also from a common sense level, it seems like it probably influences a lot about who we are.
Yeah. So I think it does. I mean, I think there are certain given kind of phenomenal quality and what we were talking about as genuine knowledge that flows from fundamentally from phenomenal experience, is a way of even illusion. As we said before, illusion depends more fundamentally on some more fundamental perception, more fundamental self-perception that is necessary to make sense of knowledge itself. So we have these different powers, it seems, and these powers are neither identical to, or it seems reducible to, made sense of, or even made sense of in a linguistic sense, made sense of by the physical correlates or the neural correlates of which they're related to, and these are powers that are that seem to be related to the kind of thing that has this sort of phenomenal experience, and from that we have rational abilities and intentionality and other descriptive features of the soul that are, strictly speaking, not describable in physical terms.
Mm-hmm.
More than that,
Right.
as a result of that linguistic breakdown, they're not literally not explainable. They're not identified. They're not able to be identified with anything that is physical,
Mm-hmm.
physical parts or larger physical systems. They're something altogether different. And it seems that these powers that we as individuals, persons have, seems to point to something like a simple thing that just has a multiplicity of powers themselves that are just not explained by the physical systems, by
Mm-hmm.
physical things themselves. And so you have like pluripotency is used in some scientific ways, but in the way that I use it in the book, it refers to something that has a multiplicity of powers that is just not identified or made sense of by physical things or neural things. And so
Like
this,
your what? Like your emotions?
yeah, like your emotions, like rational abilities, uh, uh, rational powers, and even the power of choice, if assuming choice is real, right?
Mm-hmm.
Freedom of choice. These are all powers that are descriptive of something other than the
Mm-hmm.
material neural thing that we interact with and are made sense of in a distinct way. And this is where it kind of opens up a discussion about the other question you ask about whether or not souls and dualism and all that is
Yeah.
anti-science, right? Because it's not comprehended under the powers or the auspices of materialistic science or purely kind of third person public empirical knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, if we don't have that the freedom of choice like you're talking about, we don't have that libertarian free will, the ability to think. So we're just sort of determined. So nothing really, it doesn't really mean anything in a sense, at least from a self, right?
Yeah.
There is no self in that sense. We're just kind of like a self-developing amoeba trying to survive, in this crazy, universe.
Yeah, there's some sort of determinism that seems to be
Mm-hmm.
seems to undermine the conception of self as an agent. Is yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. I think I agree.
And
Yeah.
we'll get more into that. Yeah, we can determine later whether you agree or not. I try to chew it down to eighth grade bites for myself sometimes. We'll get into this a little more later, but as to whether in the panpsychism, we won't go there yet, but whether all those little material parts have freedom of will. What and how did that happen? Kevin, you want to move us forward?
Well, I'm AI is the big thing right now, and I think maybe we've chased that down as much as we can. I know that it's going to bring up new aspects of the soul and get people interested in the soul. And Josh,
Yeah.
is this just the old Cartesian dualism, of which there are various forms that we still have that foundation, that dualism that we're looking at, and now we're just trying to expand on that and maybe build on that foundation?
Let me
Yeah.
piggyback on you too, Kevin, because I've been trying to figure out what I am, as far as, am I a Cartesian dualist or a substance form dualist? I know I'm not what I guess you would call a property dualist. Or, in your book, you bring up I think, did you create the term, the Neo-Cartesian dualist?
I'm sure some other dualist has used that term before. It's just a Cartesian itself is kind of a term of art. right, that's been commonly used. And Neo-Cartesianism has certain upgrades and modifications to it that take into account like certain emergent properties in science and the like, and tries to make sense of it. So even Neo-Cartesian is a kind of term of art that refers to Descartes' basic kind of idea about self, knowledge, and knowledge of self, and the self itself as referring to a kind of an entity or a thing that has its own sort of properties that are distinct from the body as the core conception of the self. And so in this way, it retains the old Cartesian ideas. I think Descartes is basically right. I mean, I wrote a paper this past year, and to get back to your other question, we'll come back to I wrote a paper this past year about kind of the developments in neuroscience in history, and then the developments in philosophy of mind in recent history since the 50s. And what's interesting is I treat this more like kind of a piece of intellectual history. What's interesting is that the recent developments in neuroscience, philosophy of mind, what we see occurring as academics are leaving materialism, they're going back to what looks more and more and more like not only the problems of the day in Descartes that Descartes was dealing with when he was dealing with the atomists of his day, but even the solutions are beginning to look more and more like what Descartes originally advanced with his basic kind of old classical dualism. So there's something interesting about that. So I affirm basically the kind of, or retain the old idea of some kind of Cartesian dualism that gives priority of place to Descartes' cogito, cogito ergo sum, that I think, therefore I am, that there is something about the nature of thinking itself, consciousness itself, that entails an I that is fundamental to me and that makes me me. And so that basic Cartesian idea has implications both for metaphysics and epistemology that neuroscientists themselves can't seem to get around. So even the more staunch neuroscientists that are affirming some kind of materialism, they end up talking like Cartesians, ironically, in their literature when they start talking about the self and consciousness. They can't get away from it. So there is this kind of Cartesian residue that seems implicit in most of the discussions, the really interesting contemporary discussions that are taking place today.
So in let me restate a couple things, and that is, so the soul, you're saying, it has properties which are basically characteristics of the soul, right? The things the soul can do or has the ability to achieve. And I'm thinking of things like free consciousness. We'll have to figure. We kind of lost you, Kevin.
He'll be back.
Yeah, we'll be back. We'll talk this through without him. But the way I'm understanding it is that the soul is really the home, or what houses consciousness in every sense of helping us with our will, our mind, our emotions, our thinking, our senses. Is that what Descartes thought as well? In the Cartesian sense, is he saying that the soul is that thing that inhabits us and lets us know? Or it seems like each of those cases, whether it be Cartesian and you didn't bring up anything about what's his name, Thomas Aquinas, and Aristotelian thought, which that's why I'm saying, help me figure out what I am, because so sometimes as a layperson, when you're reading it, it can be a bit confusing because I hear, what I think I'm reading is that Aquinas and people like that are saying that the soul is the animator. It gives the body form and actually animates the body. That's why when the soul leaves, that the body, it's not a body. It's just a corpse. It's going to dissolve into the ground. God's going to give us a new body at another time. So where in that, it seems like everything is really close, but if you go in, there are some differences.
Yeah, there are. This gets really weedy and nitty gritty, and so we can go here. If you,
just briefly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the challenge in talking about kind of Aristotelian, and I do think Aristotle was a dualist. I mean, of a sort. I mean, I think he made distinctions between mental properties and physical properties mental properties that can't be explained by physical properties, are not contained comprehensively, et cetera, et cetera. Thomas Aquinas has become kind of the popular kind of term for a set of dualist positions today that attempts to rein in the functional integrity of the body and the soul, or the matter and the form, and so there is the advantage of what some are calling Thomism or Thomistic dualism is that it provides us with a kind of a richer integrity, functional integrity between the body and soul, or matter and form. The difficulty with and maybe that is an advantage, and that's certainly worth discussing, and has been discussed a lot.
Well, I'm wondering if, from a Cartesian point of view, if the soul left the body, if you couldn't just hook up the body with a cybernetic brain and keep it going, right? If the soul is not you use the word functional, it's not what is the primary form giver, for lack of a better term, and giving it its function, then that could be a possibility, at least in a creative sense.
Yeah. It is at least conceivably possible. And on some Thomistic dualist views, the difficulty with talking about Thomism is that there are about 1,000 different versions of Thomism that all claim to be kind of appropriating Thomas in some form or fashion. And there are some that hold to a really kind of tighter view that doesn't allow for the kind of dualism, that there is a strict kind of distinction between these two property bearers, soul, body. And so the soul is not the kind of thing, it seems, on those set of views that could persist on. It makes it really challenging to perceive of that actually occurring. Then there are others that, like J.P. Moreland's version of Thomism, that actually look really, really close to Cartesianism. And
hey, Josh.
I
was just going to say that one of the things that really convinces me is if I decide to raise my hand, I raise my hand. My body obeys, but it's this sense of it's me. I raise my hand.
Yeah.
And then my body, my brain responds. I guess that's what you meant by how neuroscientists can't get around this. I mean,
right.
I think secularists try to have pointed out studies that a nanosecond before that hand is raised, that there's actually some kind of a physical process, and so that they are able to keep, their reductionism intact, and that there's not a soul. And things like that. But I tell you, it sure does convince me that when I think of something or I do something, that my body just follows along.
Yeah, I thought I slapped myself once, but it was my wife. I'm just kidding.
Is that a good is that a good thought experiment though? To to consider how this interaction goes on, but there is this I, the self, that is the cause of these things, and then all physical, your physical body just has to obey, it just obeys you.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought experiment. There has been a lot of discussion about that in the literature, and it goes back to this more fundamental motivation to affirm some kind of materialism, that that there is in fact a kind of unity or a kind of completeness in the physical system. And if there is a completeness, then thought experiments like that we can test through sort of brain scans and determine that there is a causal completion between the neural firing and the volition. If that's the case, then that would be an indication that something like physicalism is true. But what you're suggesting, I think, is important, is that there are these sets of properties, or you might call them I predicates, that are present and inexplicable in a kind of materialistic system.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. And I think there's much to say about that. That it certainly isn't comprehensively described, and it doesn't seem to be causally closed in that way. If it were causally closed along the lines of physics, then we would have some kind of evidentiary reason to believe in physicalism or something like it. But I think that's not the case. That's problematic. But
and when you do those scans, really, you're only just charting what the self did, right? Are you really proving physicalism or materialism when you're doing that? When a person say that in one of my novels, I came up with a thing called psychonics, which was, I'm telling you, it's the predecessor to that link that Elon Musk did, because I came up with it years ago. That it is control. It isn't controlling us. We're controlling it. And I kind of lost my train of thought there. Bring us back, Kevin. What were we talking about?
Well, it only, a brain scan is only an interaction at the most.
Exactly. It's just
means that there is an interaction. It doesn't prove that some form of physicalism is true.
Yeah. There you go.
I think so many in this area quote Josh. They quote John Eccles. I hear his name a lot, and I'm trying to catch up on the literature. But he's a Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist, and he says, man, that he's a dualist. That's a prominent scientist.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, and Josh, we probably have about at the most about maybe 20 or 30 more minutes. So want to move through some other questions without giving away the end of the movie, so to speak. This is a great book, so I pick it up today. Get it for people's birthday, for Christmas. Order ahead. Put Josh back on the #1 list. That would be our goal by the end of the day, to get him back on the #1 list, because it's certainly worth having in your library with any other books on the soul. When I started writing, I asked people. Of course, Josh and I have been friends for a while, I think, on Facebook.
Yeah.
But then I was like, who can I tap into that could really help me with understanding the soul, so that I could branch out creatively and do some fiction writing. And Mike Licona, Dr. Licona at Houston Christian University, and he immediately said, you definitely have to speak to Josh. And this has been fruitful.
Good.
Very fruitful for me. So what I would like to know, Josh, as we move on a bit, is as you were writing, as you were thinking about the soul, what triggered you to find that so fascinating, and what moment of discovery in your research did you find just so profoundly impactful that took you down that road?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that makes this discussion more relevant. I mean, there's a lot of nitty-gritty analytic philosophy we could get into, as we were getting into a bit. But this is really kind of where the rubber hits the road, and this is what people really care about. This is why I was saying your kind of fictional writing is much more interesting than the kind of analytic work that I'm even doing.
Well,
I mean,
the thing is, without that analytical work, it couldn't be so good. It's kind of, I want it to be, it's going to be sort of like the Tom Clancy of scientific political thrillers with your background information. You got to have that. I don't know. Have you watched those military movies or medical movies? If you have a family member that's a nurse or a doctor and you're in the military and something comes up in the movie, and just last night there was a person in a morgue doing something, and she was referring to the blood and different things, and she said the capillaries, and I said the capillaries. Like, I was like, click. This is so. We have an actor there who doesn't know how to say a word, but the interesting thing, that's why when people read things, they like to know that there's a sense of there's a foundation in it. It's being drawn from something, and your work is very profound. So back to that. What are those moments? What was that moment?
Yeah. So I think early on in seminary, I really became interested in the question of what it means to be human, and so simultaneous with my biblical studies and theology studies, I was starting to pick up more and more literature on consciousness and philosophy of mind and constitutional questions, and didn't get a lot of that in seminary, but I was kind of simultaneously interested in that, and I thought, this seems to directly impinge upon these bigger questions in theology that need some informing. And so I think there was a point at which, and I think this is where it kind of really resonates with most people on the ground. I just had a couple of conversations last week at a book author event, and the people I was interacting with were kind of interested in the evidence and the arguments, but they were always going back to a kind of story, a moment where they realized, like, there's something really kind of missing in a kind of secular, atheistic, physicalist worldview. And it was really the stories that captured them, the stories about how, they were talking about, these two people were talking about how they had experienced demons in their life and spirits and things like that. And the other person was talking about this moment of experience where he felt strongly that God or an angel or something was speaking to him in a moment where if he hadn't made the right precise decision on the interstate, he would have gotten in a serious wreck and probably died. But there was a moment where the Holy Spirit, God, spoke to him directly. And these were two profound moments or stories that they brought up that signify the kind of significance of the fact that we are more than our bodies. We are individualized souls, and it opens up the discussion for kind of these bigger questions about transcendence and meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And so I've even in seminary, I had this sense that there was something really missing in physicalism, and this idea that we are kind of meat machines or blood and guts, complex, however, and that there was, and that this has real implications for a wider set of issues within Christian theology. And that's so in short, I guess that's kind of what kind of drew me to think about these things and to study
Mm-hmm.
and reflect on them.
Oh, very, very interesting. I would say, and you and I discussed this a little bit ahead of time, just to see if you would be interested in mention it. But I come from a family of counselors. My wife and my daughter have their masters in counseling. My daughter's doing drug counseling now, and we have various family members with mental health issues, myself included. I suffer from PTSD and take some medication for it because I was deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan and came back a little bit impatient with things, easily agitated, and already pretty German. Then I like things, or I tell people that I'm CDO because that's the proper order of the letters instead of OCD. So I want to talk about mental health related concerns, because that kind of pulled me into the idea of a soul and questioning, in the case of a person who has bipolar or schizophrenia or a multitude of different types of mental health issues. What is their soul doing? How does that, how could a soul mislead a body like that? Does it, or is it the intertwining? Do we have does the soul have blinkers on it, or like a horse, or the body? It took a long time for me to think through that.
Yeah. I think, with the, I think any sort of mental health discussion has to sort of include a richer discussion about the nature of the soul and the powers of the soul that are tightly integrated with the body. So any sort of chemical or physical explanation, as maybe we are conditioned to believe to be the case, would be typically insufficient for explaining mental health conditions. So there's a whole set of data that's missing when we kind of reduce or place limiting pressures on mental health as being something that is purely a physical or chemical neurological phenomena. The two are tightly integrated, functionally speaking. There's certainly an interaction. There's certainly an influencing and a shaping that goes back and forth in a kind of feedback loop between the soul and the body. The body gives structure to the soul in some ways. That it shapes the soul. It as many dualists would say, it limits the perceptual powers of the soul in important ways, but also the beliefs, the developed feelings that are related to mental ideas and properties, the choices, the volitional conditioning. All of that in a complex way influences the body as well. It provides a meaningful framework in which to make sense of mental health. And oftentimes that kind of piece of the discussion is much more kind of thin in much of the psychological literature.
Yeah, I thought, as I thought through it some, I kept thinking about just some very simple analogies to help me try to understand it, like being that person that was, I used to drive down the Autobahn in Germany very fast in my Mercedes. You probably are now too. Bochum is like northwest of Cologne, right? Up that way.
Yeah, Bochum is Bochum is right next to Dusseldorf.
Yeah. Okay.
Dusseldorf and gosh, what's that big city? I just blanked.
Cologne.
I can't think of it now. The university. It'll come to me any moment. But it's anyway. It's Münster. It's right next to Münster.
Münster.
Münster. Yes.
Okay. All right. It's not like the TV show, the Munsters.
No.
So back to the thing. I was speeding. It was like I was doing it on the Autobahn one day in my Mercedes, and all of a sudden, the Polizei, the German police, pull up around me, and they don't always do sirens and stuff. They have a sign in the back, a digital sign. I just lost him there. So I'll share it with you, and then I'll repeat it for a minute when he comes back. But they pulled me over. They had Folgen Sie mir in the back of their window, Kevin, which means follow me in German. So I got him, and I pulled over, and here's Josh coming back. So yeah.
Let's keep going. Yeah.
All right, Josh, if you don't want to be on the show, we're asking tough questions, but if you don't really want to answer,
I love it. I love it.
Don't just go away. Okay. So what I was proceeding to tell Kevin is the Polizei, the German police, have a digital sign in their back window, and it says "Folgen Sie mir," which means "follow me" in German. I knew that. I'd been in Germany long enough. I lived in Germany for about 14 years.
Oh, did you?
So they pulled me over, and the guy, obviously around Ramstein Air Base or Heidelberg, they speak very good English. So he comes to my window. "You were speeding." I go, "Yes, I was." But I was going. My car said I was going 160 kilometers, not miles
Wow.
per hour, which is pretty fast, right? But 120 is average in Germany, in most places.
So this is on the Autobahn?
Yeah, you can go really fast in some places.
Oh,
yeah, I didn't know there was a speed limit on the Autobahn.
Yeah, there are in some, and that's why I got pulled over, because I hit a zone. I hit a 100-kilometer zone, and I was going 160. But the point is, for me, I gave him, he told me how fast I was going. I told him how fast I was going, and it didn't match. But I was the person in the car. I was going off of what my car said, but he was the authority, told me how fast I was really going. So, a lot of times that's how I kind of saw the soul as being the person in the car who's looking at the speedometer and getting a false reading. Even though I was speeding, I was still getting a false reading. And the guy told me the truth. My knowledge, my epistemology was wrong. Ontologically, the Polizei was correct, right? So is that a decent analogy for perhaps how the soul and the brain's working? That the brain, the soul could be 100% fine, but the body is giving it a false reading. The eyes and the brain is giving it just false information, datum, as you called it.
Yeah, I think that illustrates the kind of the distinction, the distinction that has complex effects between the way the world is presented to us, or the way that it's presented by way of or via our body or the powers that we have, and that the distinction with self-presentation.
Okay. Right. Okay. I'm going to just basically get into two more questions here. Okay. And one of them is what we had brought up earlier about materialism and panpsychism, because it seems like the materialists are really, a lot of them are bailing, and they're putting consciousness, I think, you correct me where I'm wrong, Josh, into panpsychism, as to where all of these components, or whatever you want to call them, quarks, pieces of material out there, have their own quantity of consciousness that come together. How does that count? How could that account for consciousness? And where is that? What's the positive argument and what's the argument against it?
Yeah. What's the positive argument for panpsychism? I think
It seems a lot of scientists are being, maybe is it maybe just because they don't want to accept a soul, because so that's just the only really philosophically they've bailed on materialism, so that's really their only option.
Yeah, in my most recent, even more popular book than The Creation of Self, The Banquet of Souls, I talk about this idea where I spell out the kind of the history of panpsychism. And panpsychism has a kind of checkered history back to kind of something like it is gestured at by Bertrand Russell. And then you have later thinkers in the mid to late 1900s who are picking up on something else that are dissatisfied with the materialistic explanations of consciousness. So they all just so happen to be atheistic or secularist in their worldview or their framework about these things. And so it seems to me suggestively that there is this isn't an argument from a fallacious argument. I'm not suggesting that this proves it wrong. I'm just saying that there's an interesting history here of, if materialism doesn't quite satisfy, we need something like it in its place that's still secularist in nature. And panpsychism kind of supplies what I call the kind of the final frontier for the secularists, the kind of the last hope, the final hope, or there's kind of, and it's really becoming quite attractive and hot these days as neuroscientific discussions are taking place, and we see in the Scientific American all this, even this this interest in panpsychism as an alternative option to materialistic science. And we see the famous debate between I guess the bet between Christopher Koch and David Chalmers about, will we have a science of consciousness? And in 25 years or something, that recently passed. And so they do agree that we haven't gotten anywhere closer to a science of consciousness. And some are suggesting that panpsychism maybe can help science along the way and give us a science of consciousness. But it hasn't thus far. And in fact, many of the neuroscientists have recently kind of denounced a little bit panpsychism and said it's not really science at the end of the day anyway. Nonetheless, it's still having this sort of grandeur of like, it's the next hot thing.
Well, it hasn't disposed of the material. It's just sort of added this ghostly component.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And so interestingly, again, like a lot of these neuroscientific proposals at one level are beginning to look more like the Cartesian ghost, without invoking any sort of deity or agent.
Right.
And so I think that history is important to keep in mind. It is. So some are saying that it has more plausibility as if we just say that consciousness this is the view of panpsychism at some, just crudely, that a consciousness is at some fundamental level, it is already present in kind of the physical universe, right? So at the level of kind of physical particles, consciousness is already there. If we do have that, then we don't have the problem that materialism has of trying to come up with an explanation as to how consciousness originated.
Yeah,
it's already there, right?
Well, Josh, as a lay philosopher, I have those questions about, okay, well, how philosophically, because it seems like the scientists never think philosophically. It's like, what does that do for the infinite regress, of material entities, right? It seems like they don't account for, they sort of just posit that material is eternal, which seems impossible, and they don't answer the unity question about, okay, and I gave this example at the table the other day when my wife and my son and I were sitting eating dinner. It's like we are three conscious souls sitting here, kind of like panpsychism specs, right? You would call them these little things in matter, but that's only relative. What if we took that and expanded it, right? So now we have this soul-sized panpsychism entity, which is three of us. And it's like, okay, you, me, and my son, my wife, we're sitting at the table. It's like, how do our consciousnesses unite and actually agree on anything? What's the bonding agent? Right? Is that part of where it fails, you think?
Yeah. Actually, I think that's great. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, so that's called like the unity of consciousness problem,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have other related problems to that. Like, how is it that at some fundamental level you have these kind of if there are individual depending on what view you hold, if you have these individual consciousnesses at particle level, right? Like particles are conscious.
Yeah.
Individual particles are conscious. All these individual particles are conscious. And then
Yeah.
they kind of come together in some complex arrangement to create higher level, more complex consciousnesses. Then
Mm-hmm.
you have this really important question about the binding problem, which is what you talked about. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
how is it that you bind these consciousnesses together to create a new, more complex consciousness
Right.
that's comprised of lower level consciousnesses?
Yeah, it
It
just
seems
seems impossible.
yeah, it does seem, and so for those versions of panpsychism, that seems like a really kind of fundamental problem
Mm-hmm.
uh, that substance dualism just does a better job with, and it raises a more fundamental question about and this is I think where
Mm-hmm.
some interesting discussions need to take place even more
Mm-hmm.
academically and popularly. Um, you know, uh, uh, the analogy of the mind that we are actually working with
Yeah.
doesn't seem to fit very well on this sort of panpsychism view, given what we do seem to know about the mind.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
so obviously they're going to push back. You know, my well, Philip Goff. I had a discussion with him. He's kind of one of the famous kind of panpsychists right now. He's getting all sorts of attention and funding and cool stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
because it's really kind of sexy today,
Yeah.
panpsychism.
Right.
And so this is where I think it really breaks down, and this is something that I pushed back in my discussion with him. Like, you know, it seems like your view fundamentally undermines the analogy of the mind that we're already working with.
Mm-hmm.
What I know about my mind does not seem to map onto this idea that there are maybe lower level consciousnesses.
Mm-hmm.
Or even conscious disposed things at the particle level that could
Yeah.
actually give rise to me. It doesn't
Right.
seem to be
Right.
that kind of thing. It's
No.
different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Kevin's going to turn his phone off. So everyone needs Kevin. But, you know, when I think about, okay, you know, 100 years ago or so, 150 years ago, they thought that the cell was a blob of jelly. So you look at these particles that they say that they can't say that it's just a simplistic little thing that might come together to create more complicated things. You would think that it would have to contain all that is necessary in it already. Or how would it know which part to attach to somewhere else? It'd have to be a self-contained type of thing, and in my type of thinking. And
Well, it seems to put the problem back one step.
Yeah.
I mean, if all these particles are, if there's some kind of substance that has consciousness, and then those are the building blocks,
right,
of consciousness. Well, then where did that come from? I mean, why do they have? Why does that have the property of consciousness? So
yeah,
it's interesting, but it just seems to kind of put the problem back one step.
Well, let me sort of wrap up a final question here, and then Kevin, feel free to ask what you like, and also at the end here, tell us a little bit more about your spirituality-driven leadership and your newest book, The Banquet of Souls. I've got to get that one too, for sure. But what I'd like to know is,
send you a copy. How about that?
well, I like to support authors, so
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. Well,
You
if you
know.
want to buy it, I won't argue with you.
look. You got to eat, right?
I,
Uh,
yeah.
so-
If I'm depending on my book sales to eat, I'm gonna be be thinner than I am right now. Let's.
well, I hear there's some tents down in San Francisco that you could get cheap on one of the back streets there somewhere.
I could
But
live the true
Mhm.
philosophical life.
Yeah, exactly.
Dramatic life. Yeah.
Just grow some long hair and goatee like Francis Schaeffer. Get some knickers and head on down there. So, how does the soul, do you think? And this is, I think, probably the most important aspect of the soul for me is how does this point us back to God and our connection with God? And as a Christian, how do we want to think about this as the soul and maybe ultimately what's at stake concerning whether or not that we're persons or not? The first one was about inherently pointing us back to God.
Yeah. What's at stake? Yeah. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, what's at stake is that we not only miss kind of what consciousness is, but we miss the what it means to be a person.
Mm-hmm.
And what it means to be a person seems to require something like God to bring about the nature of the person. So this goes into the one of the more nitty-gritty arguments in the creation of self, that the kind of self thing, substance that we are, could not be literally generated by material processes, could not be it's not the kind of thing that solely by way of physical processes this conscious entity could emerge. If it did, it would run into all sorts of problems, potentially contradictory problems about how it is, and the possibility that if we have comprehensive, exhaustive knowledge, as materialists claim that we do have, at least in principle or in theory, because the physical system is closed, and causally closed, then if we understand the sufficient causal mechanisms and conditions that go into making you, then we could reduplicate you. And that seems to be extremely problematic. That seems to be problematic. And so this is where it leads me to say in this reflection, like, no, it seems like our originative explanation, the origins of the self, right? This age-old discussion called the origin of the soul in Christian theology or Islamic theology, seems to point to this older position called creationism, that we are in some ways directly and immediately created by God or an agent like God. And so this is where my kind of reflections, philosophical reflections, lead me. It seems to lead in this direction, that that if we are persons in fact that are described in the way that I describe it, then it seems that not only are we radically unique in a way that physical explanations just can't do justice, right? We need some other causal explanation. That causal explanation seems to be something like an agent that brings it about, that I exist and that you exist and others exist.
Right.
Other persons exist. It's not something that can be explained otherwise, or other than some kind of agent that's doing it, that's bringing it about, that's immediate, an immediate explanation. So
I like
that's the idea.
Go ahead. Yeah, I like the way John Lennox talks about the fact that the automobile, the mechanism of the automobile doesn't do away with the agent Henry Ford, right? So we've got to think like that. So maybe I missed it, but what do you think is ultimately at stake? maybe in a couple sentences here?
Yeah. Well, I think what is ultimately at stake is what at the end of the day, what we really ultimately care about, what really makes life meaningful and interesting.
Yeah.
And that's persons. Yeah, I mean,
right.
like the fact that, you know, my spouse, my wife, is who she is. It wouldn't be sufficient to kind of get a sort of duplicate robot or body of her that mimics her in some
Right.
way. There's something further about her that makes her that is makes her and life interesting and more meaningful, that would be lost otherwise.
Right. You don't want a Stepford wife.
Yeah. Or an AI wife, right? Maybe someday we'll have.
Yeah, that's yeah, because that's where we really are in our daily lives. When we wake up in the morning, we kind of know we have souls. We know we're persons. We know we're not robots. And don't worry about the phone, Kevin. It's not bothering me or your cat either. I mean, if your cat comes in, my dog Buddy, who was named after Buddy the Elf from the Christmas movie, will come over here and join the conversation.
It's chaos over here. I'm telling you.
Oh, that's okay. You look like you're relaxed in your recliner. But any follow up or final questions, Kevin?
Oh, just Josh, just that it seems to me that you are on the very frontier of
Yes.
where we need to be in Christian philosophy, Christian apologetics, philosophy in general, and that is the soul. Because so many things hinge on it, and so many things are moving toward questions that need answers, like AI and like panpsychism and transhumanism. I mean, our secularist friends are really counting on that they're going to be, they're somehow going to be able to, even though this body is not going to last, to get find out how to download the mind into something else that's a little more lasting, you know. Which brings up so many nightmare scenarios. And so I feel sorry for them. I really do. But
it just kind of shows how dear we think life is.
Yeah.
We want to keep it.
So am I right that this is really it's been around for a long time, man. We're talking about Descartes and these guys, but hundreds of years ago. But it's the modern frontier, it seems, Josh.
Yeah. I think that is right. I think that is right. I mean, I think when technology becomes more than a tool that dictates to us what we do know, and we start conditioning ourselves to think of persons, as Robert Spaeman puts it, the German theologian, he puts it as we think of persons as something rather than someone. Well, that has pretty massive implications for what really matters at the end of the day. We're trading in something that and replacing it with something else that undercuts or undermines the meaningful world that we live in. And I think so transhumanism is right there. That's an important discussion that we're having right now. Transhumanists suppose that we can actually create a kind of technological immortality. And so that raises all sorts of profound questions about our purposes as human beings, and where the kind of the afterlife, if there is an afterlife, and these sorts of things.
As we close out here, I want to look at just the first part of the afterword from Dr. Stephen C. Meyer, in your book. got to get it to camera. Whoa, which way are we going? There we are. It's kind of weird doing it into a camera. But he says, Dr. Stephen Meyer says, what is primary, mind or matter? The question is an ancient one. Does our world and ourselves ultimately trace their origins to atoms in the void? Or are we the creations of a mind? In the creation of self, Joshua Farris has combined philosophical precision, common sense, and mastery of the field to argue for the latter. The book is certainly, worth picking up. I'm enjoying it a lot, Josh. And I definitely am going to pick up your newest one. I don't think that's even going to show on my camera well, but it's called The Banquet of Souls, A Mirror to the Universe. And, I'm glad to have this opportunity to get to know you because, not hearing the voice and seeing the personality online, it's, we like each other and laugh, or put smiley faces, but this is much nicer. To get to know you and the man behind this great work. I already know Kevin, and that's why I don't hang out with him much. Besides, Texas, I could get lost. And I did actually one time. I spent my 3 longest days traveling through Texas. Boy, that's a big, hot state. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for this time. This could literally go on for hours. And I hope that, in the future that we will have an opportunity to discuss this more. We can think of some things to talk about in your new book. And I thank you for your time and joining the Real Squabble.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for being here. And thank you for listening to the Real Squabble. Hit the subscribe button and follow us on Facebook.